Hello all, Naomi here again for another episode of Writing Rants. That's wRants. So for this episode, I'm actually going to be doing a book review. So for those who are watching on YouTube, I didn't foresee a way that I could create my typical video. So for today, you're just going to have to suffice with looking at my pretty face this whole time. This week's episode was actually inspired by an author interview that I just completed with Mark Anthony Tierno. He is a sci-fi and fiction novelist of over 30 works. So if you want a few tips on world building from a master, visit our website, thewordcount.com, on Sunday. Did I mention that Mark has a master's in physics? Because he has a master's in physics, and that's just one of the things that makes him brilliant. Anyway, so during our conversation, we touched base on the use of magic in sci-fi and fantasy works, and that reminded me of this novel that I just finished called The Book of Atriz Wolfe by Patricia A McKillip, and I'm pretty sure I'm mispronouncing her last name. But this was actually a difficult read for me. I'm not gonna lie, the story started off strong with a prologue that really captures your attention and makes you want to keep reading. She actually splits up the prologue into two sections. One represents the war that's going on in the quote-unquote real world, and then the other is what's happening, I think, in a little bit in the future of the first part of the prologue, in a magical realm. So you're kind of already getting introduced to one of the major problems that I had with this work. The timeline is hazy at best. The story switches back and forth following a few of the characters, but we aren't given a lot of clues about the shifts, how they fit into one another. Not until the end anyway, and even then, as you can kind of already guess, I'm not 100% sure how the events of the book tie together. McKillip also uses this flowery, poetic language in places where she is attempting to describe the abstract nature of the magic in her book, but it's confusing for a first read. For example, I'll read a sentence that describes the hunter, who is the main antagonist of this work. Where did it go? I lost it. Wow, sorry, it was down here. So the hunter is the main antagonist of this work, and he's like a mystical culmination of like negative magic, bad magic, not necessarily black magic, but again, hazy and confusing. So the sentence reads, "The hunter, the final shape of his magic, rode through all his waking hours." And we find out later that the hunter is a manifestation of Atrix Wolfe's magic, though an uncontrolled and selfish magic. The point is that the sentence, and many others like it, don't make sense until you read it a second or a third time and have this understanding of the text as a whole. And I checked, and this is actually the first book in a series, but when I was reading it, I really felt that maybe I had missed, book one or a prequel or something that explained the rules of this universe, of this reality, so you can kind of see where the confusion comes into play. No, in this work, if you don't read it over, you simply won't get it. There are some texts where you read it and every time you read it, you add these new layers of symbolism that makes you really enjoy the work. And this work isn't like that. I spent the entire first read confused, rereading sentences because I didn't see how they correlated, and trying to put the pieces of the plot together enough to enjoy reading it. Until like the last fifth of the book or so, give or take, when you have an "oh, that's what she meant by X, Y, and Z" moment, and that's not really enjoyable to me when I'm confused and rereading things. Not really how I want to read a book. And I can honestly say that for most of the book, I only had a vague understanding of the world and its rules. And I guess I should say the worlds and their rules, even though that's not really delved into in any detail either. And it's really because of this confusion I started to develop a limited tolerance, which will explain my further critiques and belaboring a little bit. So Another thing that really bugged me as I read the book was the gratuitous repetition of this one dream sequence. Like, I kid you not, the same dream sequence was reiterated with slight differences 4 times in only 8 pages. 4. Like, I get that McKillip was trying to, foreshadow or whatever, but man, by the end of the chapter, I can't describe to you how little I cared about it at that point. And the most disappointing part about that was that it was in the chapter that should have been the most riveting one in the book so far. Like, the readers keep hearing about this great mage, the most powerful wizard, and things like that. And this is the chapter where we actually meet him and get to experience the story through his point of view. Now, I'm not opposed to the hero not living up to the hype approach. I actually enjoy that in some places, but this was not, oh, the wizard didn't live up to my expectations. This was, oh, the writing didn't live up to my expectations. Or better yet, the expectations that the author had set up in previous chapters. And let me see. Oh, right. There were so many places in the book where I read something that inherently made no sense, but I could tell that the author thought that she was saying something really profound. Let me see. For example, right, there's the sentence. Dreams speak when the language of power remains unspoken. Dreams speak when the language of power remains unspoken. I mean, they say this after Atrix talks about his reoccurring dream, the same one that I just mentioned, the 4 times in 8 pages one. And I could make some sense of this if I took dreams to mean like goals, but what does that actually mean in the context of the book? I'm still not sure. I'm going to read a bit more to you. Atrix reoccurring dreams are about this mystical antagonist that I mentioned before, the hunter. Atrix is relaying this to a character named Hedrix, as they discuss his last reoccurring dream, where he accidentally created the hunter to try to avoid the fate that he saw in that reoccurring dream. Kind of like Anakin Skywalker style. I'm trying to save my wife and kill her in my attempt to save her type of thing. But anyhow, Atrix bowed his head. I take the shapes I am drawn to. On that field, the only shape of power I saw was death. I did not stop to think. The pain they shared lessened, dwindled finally into memory. Atrix rose, went back to the window. Staring at the moonlit peak, he saw only snow and black wind and the vast raven's wing of night. Tonight I dreamed again, he said. I dreamed of that book opened, being used. I saw the hunter's face. He spoke my name. So I came back here looking for the book. It was a dream, Hedrix whispered. Dreams speak when the language of power remains unspoken. So, I keep rereading this over and over. The dreams, that dreams speak when the language of power remains unspoken. And it still doesn't make sense to me. And, I can reason my way around a few theories, but they all are a bit of a stretch. I don't know. I might be missing something. I'm actually probably missing a lot just trying to figure out what was going on in every chapter, but it's still lost on me. Now, I don't want you guys to think that this is a horrible book. It's not. After a few reads, I actually found many things to like and appreciate about the book. Even during my frustration of the first read, there were many positive things to highlight about the writing. For one, there's this character named Sorrow, as in S-A-R-O, because the only word she could remember from her past was the human word sorrow, S-O-R-R-O-W, which also correlates to what happens to her throughout the book. I thought that this was clever, especially since the author doesn't bash you over the head with that connection. Also, I don't want you guys to note the condition of this book and assume that it's indicative of my experience while reading it. I actually found this on the sidewalk after a downpour, and crazy book lover that I am, I had to take it home and save it. So, crinkly pages, no cover anymore. It looks rough. Anyway, so there were actually some witty moments in the text which I quite enjoyed, and kept me from getting too frustrated, even though I got really freaking frustrated. Alright, so one example is after a magic boo-boo made by the prince, his brother, the king, chastises him and adds that their great uncle is probably armed and mounted and out the gate by now, trying to fight ravens with a broadsword. And I thought that was, I thought that was pretty funny. There's also this one sentence that I really freaking love. It's really long, actually, but this is the point where we really get to see the Sorrow character, and then we get to, again, see the novel through her point of view. So it's actually 2 sentences. So it's chapter 7, Sorrow Listened. Sound in the kitchen had always been a constantly changing tapestry, woven for a moment, frayed, rewoven, with threads spun from the spattering of onions over the fire, the rhythm of mincers' knives on hard wood, the head cook's brittle impatience, the undercook's feverish hysteria, a peeler wailing, the tray mistress's exasperated sibilance, milk scalding, meat spattering down into the fire, wood snapping and groaning, the changing of voices as it leaped into new wood, hungry as a spit boy, or sated, caressed darkening coals, and murmured. I really like this. And then a little further in the chapter, it's like the author says that language did not immediately suggest itself. Her name was the one necessity. Other words had temporary value. And again, this kind of just points out what I liked about the book. And this was the first read, too, that I was like, wow, that's a really nice sentence. See, I even wrote on the side that it's awesome. Anyway, so I'm going to reiterate as a whole that the Book of Atriz Wolfe is not horrible. If I were pressed to give it a rating, I'd probably give it a 3 out of 5. And again, this is just because with my first impression, I was really confused and frustrated. And if I were the reader of Naomi's past, I probably wouldn't have finished it. But luckily, I am the neurotic Naomi of the present who finishes every book that she opens. Blessing and a curse. So that pretty much concludes today's episode. I want to thank you guys for tuning in again. I know that this episode was a little ranty, but not quite as crazy, sporadic ranting as I kind of set up in the first few episodes. Mark actually brought to my attention that our author egos are pretty fragile, so I don't want to completely tear apart a work. You know, there is something to love about every piece, so I want to make sure that I highlight that to you guys as well. If you are a writer, we do have a creative writing tips blog. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, our next blog article will actually pertain to the author interview that I conducted with Mark Anthony Tierno, sci-fi and fantasy writer. He actually gives a lot of good tips, and he was just a joy to talk to. It was one of those fun interviews where you don't feel nervous, so I would definitely check in on Saturday for that. So, again, glad that you guys joined me, and I hope to see you next week. Bye!